Eric Lasseter is fixing his tie, looking at the mirror, as various voices describing different aspects of the theory of quantum mechanics, time, and space are overlapping in the background. He comes out of his closet and picks up his keys. The television has a discussion on the planets going on. Eric listens for a few seconds before turning it off. He looks around to see if he's got everything and leaves. Eric reaches his office, and his boss Ben gives him the good news. He announces the acquisition of a financial company, and Eric congratulates him for their feat. Ben asks Eric to deal with the client, and explains the company's clientele are mostly elderly people who don't know what to do with their money. But Eric has had enough of being given the acquisition's pass-downs. He recollects how his last client made him join the Dungeons & Dragons group, and he had to spend 2 weekends in some random guy's apartment with a bunch of his not-so-cool friends. All day they would argue about who makes a better cleric, a dwarf or an elf. Ben argues this time the client is a she, and they don't play Dungeons & Dragons. But Eric is in no mood to listen as he considers this to be an intern work. He calculates how much money he brings to the firm. He wants his intelligence to be utilized judiciously, but he is asked to do the sifting rather than the real dealings, undermining his abilities despite being the best employee. Ben now takes a stern tone and reminds Eric that he is the boss, who tells his employees what to do, and his employees do what is asked of them. Ben tells him that he got the job of Senior Vice President of Accounts because he didn't question the authorities and did what was told. Eric finally agrees to be a team player and deal with the said client. Eric goes out for some beers with his friend Cal, who tells him a fun fact about the entire population on Earth being gone in 116 years from now. Eric asks him if he figured that out while waiting for him. Cal confesses it is a complex calculation, and took him the entire day to figure that out. Cal notices his friend's mood off, so he asks him the reason. Eric tells him how they are taking clients from a smaller firm, and there is a woman who is going to come and teach him how to cater to the upper echelons. Cal calls him the epitome of white people's problems. Eric replies he is a rich white man. What else can he expect? Cal asks him why he is still working in this job, when all he does is complains about it. Eric replies that it pays him well, and he likes money. Cal remarks he never spends the money, but Eric defends himself, saying he does spend money, and proceeds to tell one of his classic lines, that it is better to have money and not need it than not having it. Cal tries to refute Eric's assertion by enumerating some facts, like he made more money this year than Cal has made in his entire life, he lives in a small apartment, owns 1 car, and he never comes to Magic Mountain. Eric again defends himself by pointing out he is saving because one never knows when one might need it. A server comes and gives Eric a bottle of beer, sent by a lady sitting at the other end of the club. Eric turns towards his loyal friend Cal for advice, and asks what he thinks about this. Cal tells him she was already here before he got there. She has a wedding ring, which might be an indication that she is recently divorced, and can't seem to let it go. Eric laughs at Cal's super deductions, and says he'll go over to her and check if he's right. Saying that, Eric leaves to meet the woman. Cal is in the men's room when Eric comes in. He excitedly asks Eric about the meeting, as he had noticed how interested the girl looked in Eric. Eric replies he was bored. Cal wished he could be bored with someone who looked like that. The next day Ben comes in with the client Julia Proctor. Julia introduces herself to Eric, and Ben leaves them alone to discuss the matter. As Julia starts speaking, Eric cuts her off and says they do things the easy way, which means she lays down everything he needs to know, and he can take care of the rest. Julia protests and states that she was unequivocal with Ben about what the turnover processes would entail. Finally, Eric lets go of his stubbornness and asks Julia to take a seat. The meeting stretches until the night falls, and Julia wants to ensure Eric is taking notes of details. Eric assures her he is good at his job and knows what he is doing. Julia thinks it is better if they call it a night and continue the discussion tomorrow morning. She feels hostility towards her from Eric and voices this concern. Eric addresses it by saying he doesn't know her. Eric has a keen mind, which is probably why he frequently engages in viewing discussions on planets and our solar system. And while doing so, he also reads the details of the clients they will be dealing with. The next day, Julia points out that they haven't discussed a number of clients, as she calls out their names. Eric has done his homework and made separate files for each of these clients with their information. Julia asks him to stop. She is upset because the deal was to discuss every client in detail, because Eric would not have picked on the subtleties on his own. Eric hears her and starts talking about the specific information about each client he studied, impressing Julia. Back home, he is still studying and making notes of the clients when he gets a call from Cal asking if he is up for some beers. Eric refuses, saying he and Julia have an early meeting the next day, so he has to prepare for it. Cal tries to pull his friend's leg, bringing a smile to Eric's face, and he hangs up. Once done with the file, Eric opens his journal, which has some figures made with dots and lines. He adds one more figure to it. Julia and Eric are in the middle of their meeting when Ben comes in and announces they need to be done with the clients by the end of this week, as the quarterly reviews got moved up. Eric proposes they have something to eat, so they order Chinese food. Eric talks about turning the delivery cups into plates, and goes to grab a fork for her. She is in favor of eating with chopsticks to keep the traditional spirit alive, but Eric is more of a convenience guy. For him, tradition is for those who live in the past. Eric gives intelligent answers to all of Julia's questions, and Julia calls him out for being a know-it-all. She says he is not as smart as he thinks, because if he were smart, he would have been doing more in his life. Eric gives her a brief about his background. He tells her he was a poor kid who grew up in the Midwest. Now he is a successful accounts manager, making 6 figures a year. Julia counters if money alone was how success was defined. Then Eric is definitely very successful, but it's not. Eric asks her how she defines success. She gives a simple answer, by the impact that one makes in the world. She adds that his job entails teaching rich people how to become more affluent, which is equal to teaching a fish how to swim, which has no impact per se, especially when he is capable of much more. Eric asks her to explain, so Julia tells him that he is brilliant and smarter than everybody else, so he gets by with minimal effort. But he can never reach his full potential living like this. Julia encourages him that he can have a real impact on society, giving examples like doctors curing diseases, or scientists inventing new technology. Suddenly Eric adds astronaut. He reveals he wanted to become an astronaut when he was a kid. He is surprised at himself as he never told anybody about this. Julia encourages him by saying it is not too late to do something great. She asks him not to be afraid to listen to what the universe is trying to tell him. Julia's words impact Eric like nobody else's before, and force him to introspect. Julia and Eric manage to complete the work well on time. Julia remarks Ben is going to be happy and give a bonus to Eric, but Eric breaks the reality of working in a corporate. Julia pulls a prank on Eric, and Eric falls for it, and they both have a hearty laugh. Eric proposes they go out for ice cream to celebrate, and it is going to be his treat. Eric tells Julia about his parents in such a way that she thinks they are no more. Eric talks about expenses incurred. Julia interrupts him to ask if he's talking about funeral expenses. Eric laughs and says the expense of the tickets on the Ocean World liner. Julia says it is not funny and playfully smacks him. Eric smiles as he enjoys his time with her. He asks her what she will be doing next. Julia says she wants to give back. If she considers her buyout an inheritance, she is set for life, so she wants to do something that matters. Eric asks further how she plans to do it. She says she wants to help those who can't help themselves. She is inspired by how the world works around them. In the news, when she sees how horrible things are around the world, she feels lucky she is in the USA, where things are comparatively better. But she is still not sure how exactly she wants to help. Eric encourages her. He says he believes in her. Eric hesitates a little before confessing. She has inspired him to do something great. They look at the stars thinking of their dreams and aspirations. While they are at it, Eric tells her there are over 300 billion stars in a Milky Way, and all they can do is sit there and observe. Julia reminds him that if he looks at the world through a filter, he will never see its true beauty, and if he wants to be an astronaut, he should do it. Hearing the sweetest thing ever said to him, Eric can't control himself and leans forward to kiss Julia. In the heat of the moment, Julia kisses him back, but suddenly pulls away and says she has to go. Saying that, she leaves. He calls her, but she doesn't stop. Eric needs to talk to someone, so he calls his buddy Cal and shares what happened to him in the evening. Cal cannot believe Julia just left, but adds that it is probably for the best. Eric wouldn't have a problem getting a girl with his handsome looks and intelligence. But Eric doesn't want anybody else. His heart is set on Julia. Cal reasons Eric feels so because of the inordinate amount of time they spent together in such a brief period. It is only natural for a certain amount of attraction to develop, but it will soon fade away. But Eric doesn't want to believe this explanation, because he knows how he feels about her. Cal gives up and supports his friend, who seems to be hopelessly in love. Eric asks what he should do. Cal suggests he pursue her again, because they never know she might be sitting in a bar, on the other side of the town, having the same conversation with her best friend, Kali. The next day in the office, Julia comes to see Eric, and presents him with a miniature globe as a peace offering, so that he can see the entirety of the world. He thanks her for the gift. Julia starts apologizing, but Eric apologizes first, saying he was caught up in the moment and did something he shouldn't have done. Julia hears him and apologizes, saying she should have told him earlier that she has a fiancé. Eric feels let down by this news and agrees she should have mentioned this earlier. He asks why she doesn't wear a ring. She tells him it is being sized. Eric asks her how long they have been together. She tells him since the opening of the movie Twilight in 2008. She was sitting outside a mall, and a guy came to her with tickets to the premiere. He was supposed to go with his sister, but she got sick. She tells Eric he is a great guy and soon leaves. Eric meets Cal and shares what a disaster it was. Cal advises him to forget her, but realizing he has fallen for Julia, he says Eric has 2 options. First, he can win her back in an old-fashioned way with his words, and second, eliminate her boyfriend. The absurdities of Cal's advice make Eric irritated. So, Cal says he needs to talk to her and tell her his feelings honestly from his heart. Eric waits for Julia in his car. He has decided to follow Cal's advice and confess his feelings for her. Soon Julia arrives, and Eric approaches her, asking if she has a minute to talk. She asks what is going on, and Eric tries putting his feelings in words, and prattles before Julia interrupts him by asking what he is trying to say. He confesses he is falling in love with her. Among 7 billion people, somehow, their paths manage to cross. He tells her how amazing he feels around her, and so full of life. He finally feels he has a purpose in life, and hopes she feels the same. If she does, they owe it to themselves to explore that feeling. He thinks it is crazy because all the while he was sitting in his car waiting for her, he couldn't help but think they were meant to be together. But Julia thinks otherwise. She says that if the universe truly wanted them to be together, they would have been together, as they would have met at some other time. She loves her fiancé. Adam, Julia's fiancé, walks out of their house and greets her. Julia introduces Eric to Adam. Adam seems to be genuinely happy to meet Eric, as Julia has told him a lot about Eric. Adam invites Eric for drinks, but Eric declines, saying he has some work to do. He dropped by just to say hi. He looks back one more time before leaving. Eric sits in his room thinking how things could have turned out to be, when the discussion on the television tweaks his attention. It is about Einstein's theory of relativity and time travel, with researchers saying that it might not just be a theory on paper, but might become a reality one day. The question lingers on his mind: is time travel possible? Eric visits the California College of Science. He asks security if he can meet Dr. Goyer. The guard says he can't go beyond that point, as it is authorized person entrance only. Eric politely asks if he can get an appointment to meet the professor, as it is important. But the guard, in a condescending way, remarks if he is deaf and cannot hear him the first time, he said authorized person only. Professor Hawkins comes to ask if everything is fine. Eric takes this opportunity and asks him if he can meet Dr. Goyer from the physics department. Professor Hawkins asks him to accompany him. The guard has a dumbfounded look on his face as Eric makes his way in. Professor Hawkins takes Eric to his office and explains that Dr. Goyer was one of the most brilliant scientists he has ever worked with. Eric asks if Dr. Goyer doesn't work here anymore. Professor Hawkins explains there was a lab accident. Dr. Goyer was working on a device that he believed would generate enough power to open 2 points in the space-time continuum. But his experiment wasn't authorized, and something went wrong. An explosion destroyed the physics lab. However, no one was hurt in the incident. The university president was not pleased, and Dr. Goyer was fired. It happened 5 years ago, and he hasn't been working at the university since. Eric asks the professor if he can give him details about where Dr. Goyer might be. Professor Hawkins has no clue, but Professor gives him the idea of talking to Dr. Goyer's ex-wife, who still lives in the area. Eric thanks him for his help. Before leaving, he asks Professor Hawkins if Dr. Goyer was onto something with his time travel experiment. Professor explains that Dr. Goyer's theories contradicted many modern physics principles, but Dr. Goyer was smarter than all of them, so he can't say for sure if he had something going on. Eric thanks him again and leaves. Next, Eric visits Dr. Goyer's ex-wife, Lynn Goyer. Lynn reminds him she won't be of much help, because she doesn't know where her ex-husband is. Eric asks her the last time she spoke to him. She says it has been 5 years since she has seen or heard from him. All she can tell Eric that Dr. Goyer had a grandfather on his mother's side, who owned some land in Colorado or Arizona. Eric can start his search there. Eric meets with Cal for lunch and tells him about the aftermath of his confession and how Adam was a charming man. Eric declares he couldn't compete with that unless there were a way to travel back in time, to the point before Julia met Adam. Cal acts as if he is losing his mind over such a brilliant idea and points out at the door, asking what they are waiting for. Eric asks him to be serious for a second and think, what if this is possible? Cal asks him why he is going to such extremes for this girl. Eric explains that he never did anything in life, never fought for anything, was never inspired to do anything, and never worked for anything. He is curious to know if this is what he is supposed to do. He doesn't want to look back and have any regrets. Cal, now serious, asks what he is talking about. Eric tells Cal about Dr. Joseph Goyer, who believes that time travel is possible and can be achieved in their lifetime. Cal asks him if he believes the doctor's claims. Eric doesn't know, but he would want a chance to talk to him, only if he knew where he was. Cal, suddenly enthusiastic, takes down Dr. Goyer's name and promises his friend to find this man in 24 hours for him. And as Cal promised, he found Dr. Goyer. From the county records Arizona, he came to know that the grandfather of Dr. Goyer owned a large land in rural Arizona. His grandfather passed away in 1992, and according to the records, there hasn't been a change in the name on the land deed, which means the land stayed within the family. He then gives Eric a satellite image of the house and driving directions. Eric swore he could hug Cal right now, only if he were not so perverted. Eric is happy but also doubtful, as all this could fail miserably. But if time travel is possible, things will not be the same. Cal stands straight and salutes him, saying it has been an honor to be his friend for the past 16 years. He wishes his friend Godspeed. Eric extends his hand and says the honor and privilege are his to have found a friend like him, and pulls him into a hug. Finding this a perfect opportunity in between bromance, Cal asks Eric if he can have his TV. Eric starts with his journey and drives to Arizona. He stops in front of a house in the middle of nowhere and sees a man fixing his truck. Eric calls out to Dr. Goyer, and Joseph looks up. He says he goes by the name Joe here. Eric shakes his hand and introduces himself. He tells Joe he has come a long way to talk to him. He shares his curiosity about Joe's theory of time travel and what they will require to make it happen. Joe answers they will require a lot of money and time. Eric assures him that he has the money and adds, if his theories are true, time shouldn't be an issue. Joe starts saying something, but thinks it would be better if they go inside to talk. He invites Eric inside. Once inside, Joe takes the help of the objects lying around to explain the concept. He shows Eric a ball that represents the Earth. The fabric represents what is malleable, that is, space and time. He puts the fabric on the ball and continues explaining that the point where the fabric and ball are touching represents where they currently are in both time and space. With enough energy focused on space and time, they can snap together in time, 2 moments, just for an instant. Eric points out that it sounds like the Rosenbridge theory, and Joe is talking about the wormhole. Joe agrees, but asserts his theory differs from the classic theory. He explains further that the reports mention the immeasurably small amount of time, that the gap in space-time was open. The electrons could travel the wormhole, but they arrive in a different plane of existence. When space and time are broken, a new alternate reality is created. One that follows their past exactly, until it is created, at which point the unnatural interactions spiral off into a future unrecognizable. Eric asks if it is a one-way trip. Joe says interdimensional travel is theoretically possible at some point. The concepts and equations involving that matter exceed anything in the current world known as physics. Eric asks Joe why he didn't continue his research. Joe tells him after the lab blew up, the funding was stopped, and he became a laughingstock for a failed experiment in the scientific community. Eric asks him one last question, how Joe feels about second chances. Eric and Joe are standing outside. As they look around and towards the horizon, Joe shares that all his life, he has been surrounded by the busyness of the world, which can literally drain the life out of anybody. But as he has grown older, he has come to appreciate the peace of mind that comes with the silence. He has no desire to go back. Eric tries to persuade Joe by quoting examples of many great minds in history, who had to endure incredible amounts of failures in order to achieve success. Joe asks him what his point is. Eric says that the critics have derived him to seclusion, and he may never know what he is capable of if he doesn't try. So it is time for him to get back to work. Joe takes him to his lab, where he has the board with all the research he has done, and starts explaining it to Eric. He tells him about the process of condensing energy that can be obtained with superconducted dark matter. Dark matter makes up approximately 25% of the total mass of the universe. While it is not detectable via traditional means, Joe has devised a way to collect and store limited quantities of it by using rods made of a special osmium alloy, oppositely charged, to create a unique magnetic field that attracts and stores the dark matter. The charges are then reversed, causing the dark matter to be discharged as a form of dark energy with enough power to collapse 2 points in a space-time continuum. Eric understands and asks where do they start. They start by cleaning the lab. They start talking, and Eric asks what he does these days since he quit. Joe tells him he is working on his dad's truck. He never really stopped working on problems, only shifted his attention to smaller scale problems. He says powering the machine is only half the battle, and he is working on the equations. But the variables are undefined, so Joe has spent most of his time working out the possibilities, but has no solution yet. Eric says he will be left with possibilities if he identifies the impossibilities. Joe shares how his wish to have a kaleidoscope toy led him to meet his wife. He didn't know where he was supposed to be until he had actually arrived there. Eric thinks about it, all the while looking at the equations, and says probably Joe's journey isn't complete yet. After having dinner, Joe shows Eric diagrams and calculations of sophisticated gauges and instruments that will allow him to pinpoint exactly when and where a time traveler ends up. It is important because, without such knowledge, a time traveler could end up being dropped off in the cold vacuum of space and be eliminated instantly. Joe asks the reason behind Eric pursuing this journey. Since it is a personal reason, Eric says he wasn't happy with where his journey ended up, so he decided to take things into his own hands. Together, Joe and Eric start building a machine that will help them achieve their individual goals. For Joe, it would be a redemption of the failed experiment, and for Eric, a chance to be with Julia. While working on the machine, they indulge in chit-chat about Star Wars. Suddenly, smoke starts coming out of the circuit, and it burns. Joe is disappointed because it took him 2 years to build it. Eric asks what they should do. Joe thinks a little before saying, the fuel cells discharge in parallel so he can jump past the defective board, but the loss in power won't be able to be calculated until the rods are charged and in place. Working on this plan, the amount of energy they generate with it will be directly related to the amount of time they can travel. It has been quite a while since they have been working together to build the machine. Joe pushes Eric to spill the beans and tell him the real reason why he is there helping him finish his experiment. For he could be a government agent who has come to steal his plan and use it for their own nefarious purposes. Eric finally tells him about Julia and how he wishes to go back in time to make things right and be with her. Joe is surprised and says he cannot send Eric back in time. He thinks Eric doesn't understand the ramifications of such an action, and there is no indication that this device they're building will even work. Eric argues, saying Joe said it was possible. Joe clarifies that, in theory, it is possible, but in reality, there is no way to test it. Eric persists that sending him back in time will be the test, and this is how he will prove his theory. Joe cannot risk Eric's life for the experiment, because there is no way of knowing what will happen to him if he leaves his garage. His molecules can be scattered in the cosmos, and Eric has not even thought through the situation he would be in. Eric says he'll figure it out. But Joe doesn't think Eric understands what all will change if at all he can send him back in time. And in no way is he going to take that risk for Eric's trite and juvenile reason of lost love. Eric is now angry and retorts that he would have understood if he was ever in love. But Joe doesn't let Eric have his way and snaps at him, saying he can't just stand there and pass judgment on him when he knows nothing about him. But soon, Joe apologizes and appreciates his contribution to building the device. But Eric snaps and asks Joe to send him back, which would be how Joe can pay him back for his help. That is the only reason why he is here. With that, he slams his fist on the table. Joe confesses he can't send him back because the equations remain unsolved. Unless Eric can solve them, they are stuck. But Eric now raises his voice to keep his point. He wants them to keep trying. But Joe has the last word when he says out loud that time travel is not possible. Eric looks at Joe with disappointment. All this while they were trying to build something that had no chance of working, and their efforts were futile. Joe says it wasn't for nothing, because they made great strides in improving his theory, and one cannot deny how beneficial it would be for humanity in the future. But Eric is too furious to understand anything. He takes a break and goes to a local bar. He strikes up a conversation with the bartender, Allie, a gorgeous young woman. She admits she is envious of Eric, because he is the guy who knows what he wants, and isn't afraid to go after it. Eric is in a contentious mood. He asks Allie what she would think of him if he told her that going after what he wants may result in a fiery crash. Allie thinks they should all be lucky to experience a crash like that at least once. But Eric says he would like to land safe and sound. Allie laughs and shares an incident from her childhood. When she was in school, everybody thought she was wild and crazy, first to do everything. But the truth was, she was hiding. She always played it safe, and it ended up with her becoming a bartender in the middle of nowhere. Eric asks her why she doesn't go from the place and do something else. Allie points out it is not so easy, as she has some responsibilities. She can't just sit in her room and dream. She has a debt of 40 grand to pay off, because she was so set on doing a degree. That did her no good. She remarks how degrees are a funny thing. Eric agrees everybody's got responsibilities, but it is never too late to dream. Allie thinks otherwise. Sometimes it is too late to make those dreams into reality. So Eric poses a question to Allie. He asks her if she had the power to go back in time and change anything, what would it be? Allie thinks for a while and replies she would do something that scared her a lot. She would go on an adventure and get out of this place, and she might not come back. When asked where she'd go, she answers Alaska. She has never been to Alaska, but she has heard the northern lights are absolutely breathtaking at this time of the year. And then she'll see where the universe takes her. At least she will be free. But she has lost the opportunity. She wishes him good luck with the girl. Eric stays in a hotel, writing equations from the pictures he clicked of Joe's chart in his journal and tries solving them. But with no luck, while Joe contemplates what can be done to make his experiment work. The next day, Eric visits Joe and says he's got it. Joe studies the solution and shares his progress after reevaluating the figures. They discuss the solution, which is a breakthrough. Joe asks Eric if this girl means so much to her that he didn't give up on the experiment and kept trying till he found the solution. Joe tells him if they are going to do this, they have to do it fast, because the rods are decaying at a much faster pace than he initially thought. According to the energy that will be generated, he estimates they can connect 2 moments in the past 5 years. Joe gives him the time 5 a.m. on November 21, 2008. Plus or minus 5 minutes, as the time Eric will arrive in his new reality. Eric calls it an irony. Joe has prepared a survival kit that contains pre-2008 cash, his old cell phone, and keys to his truck. That should help him to get to Los Angeles. He also reminds him that once he lands in 2008, he will be on his own and will have to figure out his long-term plan himself. Eric thanks Joe for whatever he has done. Joe asks him a small favor in return. The day Eric will arrive is the same day as Joe's lab accident. Eric asks why it didn't make the national news. Joe tells him it was a premiere of some teen vampire series that stole the headlines that day. Joe hands Eric a paper and asks him to give it to him before 7:30 p.m. It is essential, because it should prevent him from blowing up the lab. Joe asks Eric one last time if he is ready. Eric takes some time to contemplate, and then says sure. Joe wants him to be absolutely certain, because there is no coming back from this. Eric looks scared, but he has made up his mind, and says he is sure. Joe observes this as a historic moment, the first trip ever through time. He shares that he feels comforted by the thought that the other him will have an opportunity for a better future. Eric apologizes for what Joe had to go through. Joe thanks him because he got a second chance to feel alive, and for that, Eric deserves his chance. Joe embraces Eric and tells him to get her. He wipes off his tears before he switches on the machine. He recites the iconic expression from the Star Wars movie, "May the Force be with you." He activates the device, and with a bright light, Eric disappears. Eric appears in Joe's garage. He checks if he is fine, and lets out an excited laugh when he realizes he has traveled back in time. He goes out and looks for the keys to the truck in the packet Joe gave him. But to his dismay, the truck doesn't start, even after several tries. He leaves the truck and begins on foot. He walks for quite some time before he spots Rio's grocery shop, and decides to enter. He comes across Allie and recognizes her, but she doesn't seem to know him. Eric introduces himself and tells her his truck broke down. He asks if he can borrow a phone. He calls Cal and asks him to pick him up from Arizona. Cal thinks it is a joke, but Eric presses it is not. Eric pays for the phone and the water bottle and asks for a map of Arizona. He asks Allie if she likes working in the store. She says she has to because she has a college degree to fund. Eric asks if she ever thought of getting out of town for an adventure. He subtly drops a hint and asks her not to wait too long to get out, or she may lose her window. She appreciates the advice and also calls him a weirdo. Cal soon reaches, and Eric says they have to leave. In the car, Eric explains the time travel story to Cal. He tells him he came here for a girl. Cal asks if the girl is Katy Perry, but Eric dismisses him, saying it is a different girl. Cal asks Eric what he will do if the girl says no. Eric is confident she won't say no, as they share something special. He instructs Cal to take him to the California College of Science, CCS for short, and then to South Hills Mall. Cal says CCS is all the way on the west side. It will take them an hour to get there, and they won't be able to make it back to the mall by 6:45. He makes a phone call to ask for the contact number of CCS. He dials the number and asks for Dr. Joseph Goyer, but the person on the other end of the phone hangs up on him. Now Eric has to make a significant choice. He chooses the mall. Before leaving, Cal asks him how he turned out to be in the future. Eric tells him he is the same, except he came out of the closet. Cal is baffled because he doesn't even know his preference yet. Eric spots Adam outside the mall and quickly makes his way to where Julia is sitting and tells her the same story that Adam had told her when they first met, but Julia outrightly declines, calling the movie garbage. Eric tries hard and says the tickets will go to waste, and she suggests he cash out the tickets if the movie hasn't started yet. Eric cannot believe it is not working out, even after he comes clean. Suddenly, two boys fighting over a kaleidoscope catch his attention, and he turns toward Julia to thank her for inspiring him to do something great. Cal comes there in his car, and Eric asks him to take him to CCS as fast as possible. Eric turns back to see Julia talking with Adam, which is how Universe meant it to be with them. He makes his way to the university, and the guard stops Eric from going in. He is as obscene as ever, but this time Eric stands up to him, scaring him out of his wits, and Eric warns him to be nice to people. He swiftly makes his way in, and starts banging on the lab door calling for Dr. Goyer. As soon as Joe comes out, he starts yelling at Eric for interrupting a crucial experiment, but stops when Eric hands him the paper. Joe reads it and is amazed. Eric is leaving Joe's home. Joe insists he stay a little longer, as he is a great lab assistant. Joe is still together with his wife. Eric bids them farewell, as he believes the universe has something entailed for him. Eric drives back to Arizona to meet Allie. He has made up his mind about what he wants, and proposes that Allie come with him on an adventure. Allie asks him where, and Eric repeats what future Allie had said. The northern lights of Alaska are absolutely breathtaking this time of the year, as Allie smiles at him.